Hello everyone and welcome back to the 22nd episode of the Road to FIDE Master series, in which I will cover the round number 7 from Irena Varakamska Memorial, in which I got paired with white pieces against an Indian player. I'm not really sure how to pronounce his name and surname, so really sorry about that. But he was a FIDE Master, he is a FIDE Master, rated over 2200, so as you can tell he dropped a lot. And I considered myself as a more experienced player because I have been playing chess longer than my opponent, and for that reason and for the reason that I have white pieces, I decided to go for a win, as usual, right? So, what was my idea for the game? I opted for e4. I knew that my opponent used to play a lot of Sicilian, but recently kind of switched to the Caro-Kann, and based on the fact that he was not experienced player at all, and especially in this opening, I decided to try some let's say niche line against him, and I opted for the pan of attack that I used to play back in the days, let's say. Then I switched away from it because I thought that it does not guarantee an advantage for white, but for this specific game I decided, okay, let's jump back to this variation. What's the idea? The idea is that if my opponent develops normally, I have this bishop g5 move, which is rising in popularity, I would say. I used to play knight f3 more, hence maybe that was the reason why I didn't like it so much, but bishop g5 is far more interesting, mainly due to the fact that if my opponent takes on c4, I push d5, and then I am playing, at least for a second, at least for a few moves, without a pawn. At this point, after knight e5, queen d4 is the main line, but after h6, newly found move from the computers, let's say, black should be fine, so I switched the move order a little bit and went with knight f3, which already took my opponent by surprise, and this was my game plan, right? Surprise him in the opening and hope for getting the better position. At this point I considered many moves like bishop g4, knight f3, queen c7, all three of them, and my opponent opted for queen d6. The other move that I unfortunately did not check before the game. However, I knew that it cannot be that good because it was not on my list, let's say. So I had to just figure out what to play against it. So after queen c7 move, I knew that perhaps I would go for the bishop f4, trying to pin the knight to the queen, forcing the opponent really to take on f3, and then I would be happy with such position because he has to stay on the c file in order to protect the pawn. So the least I can do is basically force a draw with the variation like this. And the more I can do is actually at this point, when the queen is on c7, try to go queen g3 with the idea of exchanging queens, grabbing the pawn back, maintaining the activity, and a little bit better endgame. However, okay, one more variation. At this point, opponent can also try knight d3, but then I have a very nicely looking move, queen takes d3, not bishop but queen, with the idea that if my bishop is taken, I can take the pawn anyway, and if my queen is taken, then I take his queen, and at this point I am just a piece up. So for those reasons I decided against queen d6 I will play the very similar move, but as you can tell, the eval bar dropped immediately. Why? Because in here the best option was to play bishop e2, which was also in my notes, but I figured that after the exchange I was not sure whether or not I will be able to take back this pawn easily. So I decided, okay, let's go for the bishop f4, because the position should transpose, right? If my opponent takes, he has to go here to protect the pawn, and then we get the same position. However, because the queen is on d6, not on c7, opponent has additional option that he chooses. What is it? It's e5. e5 was not existing in the queen c7 variation because when we go through the same moves, at this point I can simply take en passant, and the idea is that I took a pawn, I'm threatening to the other one, and the queen is threatened too, so opponent did not achieve much. But with queen on d6, however, I cannot really take here because the queen protects the pawn, so the queen can take it with a check with a tempo. So I am just a pawn down, and obviously I have still some initiative for it, it's not like I have none, but I am just too slow. I thought that in order to be better here, I really have to put my rooks as quickly as possible on the d and e files, but calm development like bishop e2, castle, rook e1 was just way too slow. Therefore I even considered moves like king d2 to just simply try the fastest way of activating the rook, but obviously it's just too crazy and does not accomplish much after, let's say, simple bishop e7 covering the e-file, right? So this is the problem, and because of that, and because e5 was played, I'm already having some troubles because I'm out of my preparation, which I felt was great, but it turned out not to be so great. I'm not even sure if I should be better or not because e5 move is really powerful one. And what should I play? As we've said, this move is not that appealing, so I have to either move the bishop here, here, or here perhaps, or the queen, because actually I can try to place my queen on the e-file in order to not only pin the pawn to the king, but also create some pressure to it, right, with the queen and with the bishop. So those were my ideas. So let's go through them quickly. Bishop g3 was the worst one because after bishop g4 my queen is nearly trapped. The only available square is e3, and then the knight can take my other pawn. So I'm already 2 pawns down with the attack to the queen. So even if I will be able to, let's say, exchange here and so on, I'm still just a pawn down with no clear compensation for it. And for that reason bishop g3 is not an option. Bishop d2 felt just too passive. I don't have any more pressure to the e5 pawn, so the queen can move wherever she wants, perhaps to b4, defending this pawn, attacking this one. I was not liking this position either, so either I go with bishop g5 or with queen e2. Queen e3, as we've discussed, is not that great, once again because the knight taking on d5 would mean that my queen is also attacked. So bishop g5, my opponent had few options here, but I did not like either of them, neither of them, to be honest. e4 being the one of the variations because I'm losing the grasp of the pawn on d5 really, and I don't know what to do. Perhaps the best practical option would be to just try to play queen g3, exchange queens, and then take a pawn, but I was unsure, is it better for me, is it not, because this is a passer, but at the same as a related pawn, so you never know how is it going to turn out later. For those reasons I decided to play queen e2 because I maintain the pressure to both pawns, and yeah, I feel like knight d5 is not working because now I have bishop e5, knight c3, bishop c3, queen e6 is not working, queen e7 is not working. I calculated all of that to only after the move spot the idea of him playing bishop e6, simply covering the e-file with not a queen but a bishop. And I don't have a castle because, well, the d1 square is attacked, so all I can do is basically place my rook here, after which my opponent's queen can go anywhere. This pawn is protected, king is kind of safe, queen is kind of safe, so is there anything concrete? I don't know. I will just mention that after queen e6 I can simply castle, let's say, and then maintain the initiative because of this pawn, because of the king, open files, open diagonals, many weaknesses, and so on, so on. But with the queens on the board, in this setup, I was not so sure. So I was very unhappy with myself that I've spent so much time on queen e2 and missing such an easy move. To my surprise, my opponent after queen e2 replied rather quickly with knight d7. So either he missed the same move as I did, or maybe in this specific variation, he did not like the fact that after rook d1, he still struggles with development of the king side. Maybe, I don't know. But knight d7 was played, that's all that matters, let's continue. At this point I just went away with the bishop from the attack because I wanted to take back on c4, and 3 moves ago I had a critical moment tactically. In here I have critical moment strategically. Why? Because I don't know what to do, how to develop. Should I play f4 or f3? Should I play a4 or not? Should I place my bishop here or there? What to do? I considered many options and in the end decided to play healthy move bishop e2, waiting for the opponent to show me what he's willing to do. The most tempting move will be always f5 in this situation, trying to go for f4 and take my bishop, but it opens this diagonal, so after knight b5 I can hit the queen, prepare d6, so I'm really unsure how could the position resolve later on. Queen b4 check would be an annoying one. Perhaps I would have to play like king d1 in order to maintain this threat and so on. So very sharp situation. I would have to evaluate it if my opponent went for f5 move. But as you can tell from the game and the option he chose a6, firstly taking care of the b5 square, and only after I castled, now he pushed f5. So he is no longer threatened here or there. so he's not that worried about this diagonal, and I should be worried about this f4 move. In here I have an option to play either f3 or f4. I was unsure which option should I choose. f4 and then f3 and then f4 from the opponent was not that bad for me because I am getting the e4 square for my pieces. Maybe even now immediately I can try to play knight e4. So f3 was not about allowing the opponent to play f4, but rather staying like this. And I had to evaluate, do I really favor this structure or let's say this structure, because after f4, e4 push seemed natural. So I couldn't decide, and those were my strategical problems that I have encountered by not playing the opening precisely tactically, because I couldn't decide, and then I went with f4 trying to maybe force some things or whatever, but it was not objectively a good option. However, it kind of worked out because I really cannot tell you guys why my opponent did not push e4. It seems logical to just close my bishop there, to gain some space in the center, to have this passer that is protected. It all suits to the opponent. Why didn't he play that? I don't know. At this point I was planning bishop f2. I'm not really worrying about losing the pawn because once again this threat is possible. But after, let's say, a normal developing move like, I don't know, knight f6, I was not sure if I like this position. Let's say I push a4, he develops, I push a5, okay, I got some activity on the queen side, but what's that for? This pawn will be perhaps a weakness, not a strength. This will be a strength on the other hand, so I felt like strategically I'm worse. But anyway, as I've told you guys, my opponent did not go for e4, but at this point he opted for bishop f6. And I was so happy with that, that he gave me an opportunity to exchange the pawns, exchange maybe even the bishop, the bad one, and just continue the game like that, that I was really tempted by taking here. But then I thought, okay, wait, maybe my opponent is not willing to play e4 anyway. So maybe you can take a risk. I was talking to myself. Maybe you can take a risk, play a4, which you always wanted to play, and if he will not push e4, maybe then you will take, or maybe he will take you. And this is what happened, guys. Instead of me taking him and losing a tempo, I did what I wanted to do anyway, and he was the one that took my pawn. So I basically got a one useful move for free. Not only that, after me taking the pawn, he played bishop e5. So once again I was tempted, okay, let's just take it. Let's just be happy with the exchange because my bishop was a very bad one. Let's do it. But then I thought, maybe he will be the one that wants an exchange. So I pushed a5. Once again, a useful move. I will not get into details, but I wanted to stop b5 from being played all along, so that was my idea, and this happened, guys. He took me on f4 too. So with the last 3 or 4 moves, what I achieved was exchanging my terrible bishop and pushing the pawn as far as to a5 square, while my opponent did not accomplish much. So I really don't understand his strategical choice, because I feel like at this point really e4 would be the way to go. But in the game, in this position, I am more than happy with what I achieved, and it was thanks all to my opponent, not to myself. That's the problem, but that's the other story. Anyway, my opponent decided to play knight e5. Maybe it was his idea to try to plant the knight there, but at this point I spotted an idea of jumping to a4 and then b6, because he cannot really take my pawn on d5, because I give him a fork. Obviously he can just run away with the queen with a check, but the point is that if I go away, he goes away, seems like he is fine. He is really not, because I can harass his queen, place my rook there, and I saw this variation. I was more than happy to get this on the board, because even though at this point I did not see a clear way how can I win the game, and I'm a pawn down, the activity that I get here is just amazing. And to be honest, computer says that it's +3 already, because what I've missed is that if my opponent tries to go away from the pin, I can simply take on e5 anyway, because after queen e5 I have bishop c4, discovered attack, getting the queen back, winning the game. So this would be the whole idea. Therefore knight e4 is well working, and he cannot take my pawn, he has to develop, and after knight b6 and b4 I felt like this structure is just an amazing one. I take control over so many squares, it protects itself basically. So comparing this position to the position from before playing f4 from my perspective, it's, you know, earth and heaven basically. Anyway, I was feeling happy, and even more happy when my opponent decided to play bishop b5. It's a really bold decision to make because it is allowing me to basically double his pawns. So I was like, what is he even doing? Strategically, I felt like I am much better. But on the other hand, when you look at those pawns, it's very hard to attack them because how can I do it? This square is taken, so I cannot go there with the rooks. This pawn might be attacked only by my queen, but the queen would have to stay there and it's under the e-file pressure from the rook. So it's not that obvious for me to continue. And also this pawn takes away the squares for my knight. So I am really unsure how should I color this knight. Is it a great one? Is it a bad one? Is it something in the middle? I don't know. But the point is that obviously I accepted the trade on b5 and then I was still unsure what to do, so I decided to play a few quiet waiting moves like king h1, like h3, like rook d1. I was really not sure what my opponent is planning, and in here I spent quite a lot of time trying to decide what should I play. Rook here, maybe rook here, or maybe rook c1, plenty of options, and there is a famous line of Savieli Tartakover which I would like to mention, and it goes like this. Whenever you have to make a rook move and both rooks are available for a set move, you should evaluate which rook to move, and once you have made up your mind, move the other one. It's very funny but kind of true because I spent quite a lot of time deciding what would I want to play here. I decided that I would really want to play rook a to d1 and I did that, and just one or two moves after I really was unhappy and I thought, oh well, I could have played rook f to d1. So you may say that this is just a funny line, but it has some truth to it, meaning that in general deciding which rook to move and where is kind of a hard task. So sometimes it's just better to gamble and not think at all and choose whatever, or if you, as I've said, found a way of playing, then perhaps you can switch right in the end. Anyway, what's the problem? As I've said, I did not have any idea what my opponent is planning to do, so I decided, okay, I will just simply play rook a to d1, maybe double stack my rooks on d-file, overprotecting my pawn, and let's see what he's got. But only after my move rook f2 I realized that what his plan was. He decided to go knight f7, trying to exchange queens on the d6 square, making this knight an amazing one because it covers all the weaknesses, and with this maneuver he was also allowed to attack my weakness. So his weaknesses are alright, my weaknesses are attacked. But it was a little bit too late. I should have thought about this earlier on, but you know, I was so fixated on thinking which rook to move that I forgot about his ideas. I didn't even see them. So rook a to d1, rook e8, rook f2, knight f7, and now I have problem what to play. I decided to play rook c1 because one thing I knew is that thanks to this diagonal being opened, I can try to plant my knight on the 7th rank, and I did that because he opted for rook e4, and after the exchange I was able to go there. Obviously I'm losing a pawn, so from the distance it might have looked not so promising, but I was working on such situations with my students. I mean the connection of rook and the knight when the rook is on 7th rank and the knight is jumping somewhere around it. So it was not that hard for me to spot from the distance the idea of playing knight d7 with then trying to play knight f6. Just give you a simple line, let's say opponent does not do nothing, I can now just simply go here. If he goes there, I can checkmate very easily, and if he goes to f8, I can simply give the perpetual check by jumping here and there all the time, while he will go here and there all the time. So obviously now the eval bar is up, but due to the fact that I played a bad move for the opponent. Going back to this point, my opponent acknowledged that fact, acknowledged that threat of the knight f6, so he decided to play knight e4, after which I've prepared rook f4. It might be a little bit scary to place a rook like that unprotected, and it is scary and you should never play such move without checking it, but I checked it, and I checked it in a way that allowed me to play it, because after knight g3 check, king h2, rook f4, even though I lost material, right now I can start deliver this perpetual check and draw the game. So this was the idea. For those reasons my opponent decided against playing knight g3, forcing things and drawing a game, and he decided to go rook a4. And I feel like at this point I could have simply taken on e4 myself, because now if he accepts the rook with either the rook or a pawn, perhaps a pawn, I can now once again try to deliver the perpetual. But I felt like on a4 the rook is kind of active, and I don't care much about the pawns, but rather the activity. So I decided to play simple calm move king h2, and only after he took on a5 I decided to take here. Why? Because, okay, if he decides to take the rook, the draw it is. Whatever, without such many material, the draw is okay. But I felt like he might be inclined to take the knight here, after which I prepared the move d6. And I felt like with this misplaced rook, my position is very much promising. Why? If he takes my pawn, for example, I will checkmate him in 1. So that's the problem. If he will take my rook, then I can simply retake the rook. The queening is there, so he cannot take mine. And after rook a8, I have rook d4. With the idea of rook d8, I'm winning the game too. So if he cannot take here and cannot take here, maybe he will go back. But then I have rook e2 e7. And with the doubled rooks on the 7th rank, you never know what's coming at you. And the problem was that my opponent was very, very low on time. Below, I believe, 5-minute mark, with still few moves to make until the time control. So the obvious way of continuing for him would be perhaps to simply take my rook, and he did that in the game, so we'll get back to it in a second. The other way of dealing with the problem would be perhaps to play rook a8, trying to cover the checkmates and so on. And the idea is that even though I can take his rook, he can take mine, and perhaps in such variation we would be able to exchange most of the pieces, most of the pawns, and draw the game effortlessly, because this pawn will be simply falling. But I decided that I will still proceed with d6 because rook a8 is not that natural. However, my opponent, as I've said, took on e4. I was happy with that because I took on this d7. But now he played a move that I've completely missed, which is rook a6. And I was like, uh-oh, I have two less pawns, and I don't have an opportunity to make my pawn active so much in order to really cause some problems to the opponent. Why? Because if I, let's say, proceed with the classical approach, with then hopes of giving away the rook for queening the pawn, after rook d6 I am completely stuck. My rook is stuck, my pawn is stuck, and those pawns are pushing, so I am basically lost. And for that reason I have to think about alternative option, and I don't really fancy this option, since as of now the difference is that this rook will be much more active than in the variation that we saw already. So I was like, okay, what can I do? I just completely missed that, okay? So I decided to simply play king g3 because I felt like my opponent also does not have a good move to be made, really. And in the game he decided to play b4, which was an easy way for me to draw the game. I believe the best way for him would be to play rook b6, trying to cover the pawns, attack this one, and start launching this one. Computer has its own theory on how to draw this game with some crazy king f4, king e5, king e6 maneuvers and something like that, with the idea that in the end you can play g4, take away this square, and now be happy because there is no promotion because of the checkmate and so on. I'm having none of that. I would have to find some easier way, and I believe the easier way would be to simply, after rook b6, play rook e7, threaten to this pawn, and if the pawn is threatened he should perhaps take this one, and I would take this one in order for then later on be able to take the e-pawn. And even though he has the b-pawn more, his king is out of place, so I should be able to draw this. But as you can tell, it's getting a little bit shaky, so I was not happy with the outcome of this whole position, because as I've told you guys, my opponent was under time pressure, but he did very well in such circumstances. But at this point perhaps he knew that in every variation there should be a draw in the end, so he just pushed b4. After this move I decided to take a pawn, offer a draw, and he immediately accepted, due to the fact that if he takes a pawn, I take this one, attack this one, then twice, and so on. It's easy draw. So I would say that this game was far from being ideal, but it was not far from being interesting. I feel like once again I gave you plenty of analysis to consider, to follow with me, and so on, so I'm very happy with this fact. Let's now check the review. As you can tell, 97.1, 97.0, so pretty good game on both our sides. However, I felt like it might be a little bit more than that because I felt like I've missed some chances here and there. But anyway, one more draw in this tournament. Sorry for that, guys. Result is the result, but the game is the game. I hope you liked the game and my analysis, and if that's the case, that's the fact, please leave a like under this video, subscribe to the channel because we have 2 more games to be published. And with that, thank you all for watching. We'll see each other tomorrow. Bye bye.